Hello and welcome to the garden. Well, this is freakishly bad luck because I think this is the first time this month that it looks like we might be getting a bit of rain. We've had hardly a drop all month. It's been so dry, but as soon as I come into the garden to do something, then it chooses to rain. So that's just my luck. But anyway, I have a little job to do today, and it's quite an important one. I need to get it done, and it's with the strawberry. So these are on the bench here. These are all potted strawberries. I think they're in 4 or 5 litre pots. I can't remember. Yeah, these are 5 litre pots. I've got a few manky looking fruit left. This is just from I think the final flush really. There are 1 or 2 that haven't ripened yet, but undoubtedly the birds will steal those, because what I want to do with these is rescue the young runners here, and I think the easiest way to do that will be to get them out of here and into one of the beds where I can peg these runners down and encourage them to root, because I want to save plants from this variety. I've got 2 varieties on the bench here. The other one gave me some really freaky fruits. They started to produce leaves all over the berries. Not what you want at all. Rather rare, thankfully, that disorder. But this one has produced really nice fruit. And during their main season, I looked over all the plants and I just put an old plant label in those that I thought were giving a good crop of well-formed berries. There are 1 or 2, maybe even 3 of these where I thought the fruit wasn't 100%, so I didn't stick a label in those. So I'm just saving runners from the best ones. And of course you can just get a little pot of soil and peg these down into the pot there, and they will root and give you new plants. But I think it's probably in the end easier if I get these out of the fruit cage here and just make some holes in one of the spare beds, because I haven't been doing too much in the garden for some weeks now. Normally at this time of year the entire plot would be rammed with crops and I'd have stuff sown to follow on. Well, this year I haven't been able to do as much as I would like, but on the other hand it means I've got plenty of spare space, so there is room for me to drop these in the ground, and then I can more easily lay out the runners. And what I'll do is leave them to root there and move them probably in the winter into their final destination. So in previous seasons we've had a crop of strawberry plants in a couple of the cold frames. Well, I'm going to put melons in those frames next year. The strawberries are okay in there, but they're a bit of a faff to harvest and get to. So I think we're going to take one of our main veg beds and turn that over to strawberries for next season. We're reducing a little bit how much we grow. We're going to focus on our favorite crops, so I don't mind taking one of those beds out for more strawberries next year, and that will free up those 2 frames, and we'll just use those for melons, which was their original intended use. So I don't know how many of these I will be saving, 8 or 9 pots I think, and I think most of them have produced a few runners on now, and yeah, it'll be good to propagate from these. I think this variety, I'm not 100% sure, because the company we got these from seemed incapable of supplying what I'd actually ordered, but I think these are Malling Centenary. So one of the pretty modern varieties. It's a very nice strawberry, but of course, like so many, they're bred for commercial interests primarily. So the berries are very firm. They are very well flavoured. I think if you go back a few years, commercial strawberries were pretty nasty specimens, to be honest, but now there are varieties being grown, at least here, that are fairly well flavoured, and Malling Centenary is certainly one of those. But the berries are pretty firm, and well, that's great for commercial producers, because the strawberry, of course, is one of those annoying fruits that doesn't ripen after picking. So there are some of those. Many fruits will ripen off the plant. Strawberries, cherries, grapes, those fruits will not ripen after picking, so they've got to be picked ripe. So if you've got a soft berry, it's going to be in a pretty rough state by the time it gets to the shops. But thankfully, these firmer berries that have been bred more recently, they do have good flavour, and because they are quite firm, they can at least be picked properly ripe, because there's nothing worse than an underripe strawberry. It's just horrible. So I better stop talking, get these pots out of here, and see what sort of runners I've got on them. Right, so this area, as you can probably see from the debris, had our onions. We lifted those recently. Bit of a mixed bag this year. Had quite a few bolt. They undoubtedly didn't enjoy the conditions, but anyway, this scrap here is now free, so you can see how dry the soil is. I will have to water these pots after I've got the plants in. Now I could just sink the pot in, but I think I will knock them out of the pots. Dear oh dear. Now our soil is very sandy, and we have to add a lot of bulky organic matter. I mean, you can see just how sandy that is, and yeah, without that organic matter, this would be very dusty. Well, it is very dusty, but that's because it's dry. When we take these out in the winter, we will be putting a really thick layer of horse compost in here. We've got lots of nice runners on this plant, so let's see if I can get these out. Yeah, and there's tons of root in there. If you give them the chance, the strawberries will produce massive amounts of root. Anyway, I'm going to drop that in the hole. I don't have to be too fussy about this. It's not really I'm not really growing them exactly. I'm just going to leave them in here temporarily. These plants will be thrown away at the end of the season, but now I can space these runners out and peg them down. So I'm getting one nice specimen on most of these. Some of them will give me more than one. You can see that one's going on to, that'll give me another plant later on. Now, what you can do if you really want the largest and finest runners, you can limit the number. For a start, you can limit the number of runners you keep, and then when these go on, that will then run on. That's the main stem. That will run on further and produce yet another. You can cut that off and just keep the one plant, and that will be the better specimen. I'm not that bothered about that, to be honest. I think I will keep whatever they produce here. I will allow them to produce as many plants as they can, because I would really like quite a few plants from this, because I want to restock the pots as well as fill a bed outdoors. I'll have to wait and see how many runners are actually produced in the end, but I think I will allow them to produce whatever they can, and that just means some of them will be a little smaller and weaker. Maybe I'll put those in the ground, and I might not get a huge crop this coming season, but they should be good the year after. So I don't need that on there anymore. But no, I've got quite a lot of runners here, which is good. So now all I'm going to do, I've just got some bits of well, this is plastic coated wire. I'm just going to bend that in a little loop, and then I can just pin those down, not too tight, but it just helps that contact with the soil there. They will root down readily into that. Just stops them moving around, allows me to space them out a little bit. I'll do the same on both sides. This one is well on its way to producing the second runner. Yeah, what else have I got? Well, I've got one more. That's quite a nice, strong looking growth, that. So I should get at least half a dozen from here, and I mean, it could be as many as a dozen plants, but that would be great. This is one of the better specimens, so yeah. Well, that's it really. I'm just going to go along the bed here, dig out some holes and peg down the runners. Well, this plant has produced some mighty runners. I mean, these are going to be great. However, this one is trying to produce flowers already. I do not want that, so I'm going to pinch that out. That doesn't help at all, but that's going to be a really great plant. And already you can see maybe the nodes underneath starting to form roots. This one's a little bit behind, but this is well on the way to forming roots there, and won't be long before that gets right down into the ground and away it goes. So there they are. I've put 8 plants in total, and I think with a bit of luck, I mean, they've got varying amounts of runners on them, but I think I should have plenty to restart the pots and then to fill maybe half a bed with new plants. Well, the strawberries have to be the easiest of the soft fruits to propagate. They do pretty much all the work themselves, but there's a limit to how long you can keep them going. So a strawberry plant, whether it's in a pot or in a bed, is really only productive for, say, 3 seasons. I mean, you can leave them a bit longer, but productivity does decline. The first year, with regular runners planted in the winter or the very early in the spring, you get a crop that first season. You get the best crop in the second season, and then the third. After that, it will start to diminish in the third or after the third season. So I think in a garden setting, it's not a bad idea to replace them let's say every 3 years. Commercially, they're often replaced every season. So, but that's a different matter. I think in the garden you can get 2 or 3 good seasons out of a strawberry plant. The other thing is that they're really susceptible to all sorts of diseases, so it's a good idea not to replant in the same soil, but to rotate them around. And that's another reason why it's going to be better for us to move into one of the veg beds here. We can have them for 2 or 3 years in one bed and then move on to another bed, whereas I don't have the same scope in those frames for various reasons to do with the construction of those frames. They're not very deep, so two of those frames I made a little bit higher with a wooden surround, and we have the strawberries in those, but the other frames don't have that extra height, so moving them around there is a little bit more difficult, and I don't really want to extend the other frames if I can avoid it. In the beds here, it's a lot easier, so that's what we'll do. We'll take out one of these beds from the normal crops and have the strawberries in there 2 or 3 seasons, and then move it to a different bed. Now you can keep propagating via runners for, I don't know, an arbitrary amount of time, but at some point, in all likelihood, the vigor and productivity of the stock will start to decline, and the usual reason is virus. Strawberries, actually lots of the soft fruit, but strawberries in particular are ever so prone to virus, often spread by aphids or other bugs. I think aphids are the most common source of viral infections, and those viruses will reduce the yield and the health of the plants, and at that point you've got to skip them and get some fresh stock. I think under certain conditions you can propagate in such a way that you avoid virus, but not by taking runners. So as soon as you see the vigor and yield going down, it's best to bin the plants and start with new stock. Unfortunately, if you're trying to grow something a little less common, like the Gariguettes that I really love here, and they're a little bit tricky to get, there's a chance that by the time my Gariguettes come to the end of their useful, productive life, I may not be able to replace them. I found 2 sources. Well, actually, I only found one, but somebody commented on a previous video and tipped me to another source of Gariguettes, and it's just as well, because in fact only one of those 2 sources had actual Gariguettes. I have no idea what the other one sent me. So I'm down to 1 source of those plants, and there's every chance with an old variety that after a few more years I'm not going to be able to get it. So I will be propagating from the Gariguettes as well, and hopefully I can keep those going for some years. And I mean, it just depends. You have no idea when they might start to deteriorate through virus and other diseases, but it is a problem with soft fruits, raspberries as well, but the strawberries I think are probably the worst for that, and that is why we have very few old varieties. I mean, all bar one, I think, of the 19th century varieties, and there are some wonderful descriptions of them in the old books. A vast array of interesting strawberry varieties from influential breeders and nurserymen. They're all gone. Royal Sovereign is still around. I think that's pretty much the only one that one can readily find from the 19th century, and that was just at the very tail end, and probably not the finest example of those either. But yeah, it's a pity. I would love to taste some of those really old varieties, but they are no more. Virus has taken them out. But anyway, now I've got to get on with the Gariguettes. Now I've taken the pots off of that shelf, I can lift the shelf up, I can get a look at the young Gariguette plants and see what they're producing. I know they're producing runners. I've got 6 small plants. They produce very little fruit. They were small pot-grown plants, perfectly nice, healthy plants, but really not an awful lot of vigor and growth from them. And I don't think pot-grown specimens establish particularly well. I mean, that was a tight bundle of roots in there, and although they're growing okay, those root balls, they don't get out into the soil very easy, unless you sort of break them up a bit. And with the strawberries' really fibrous root system, that's not so easy. So I'm not worried about the plants. Their mission is simply to produce runners, but I think they're producing a reasonable number. But I've got to do something to get them in some soil as well. So these are my Gariguette plants, and although they didn't give us much fruit, they gave us enough to know that these, in all likelihood, really are Gariguettes. But actually, looking at them now, I can see that the plants are really healthy. They've got that perky upright habit that the Gariguette has, which I really do like. But they've also produced a ridiculous number of runners, and some of these are really long. I've got them here with 4 young plants on now. I'm not going to keep 4 plants on a runner. That's probably rather excessive, but I could at least keep 2, maybe even 3. They're growing so well. Some of these plants, they're already starting to form little roots there. So, I mean, that's going to be a great runner. What have we got here? Well, the second one is already forming roots, as is the third, and there's a 4th at the end, and on the runner is going. So, yeah, I mean, that's crazy, but I think that's also consistent with Gariguettes. They are very productive in the runner department. But anyway, in terms of rooting these, I didn't really want to peel off the membrane. It's a bit of a faff. So I've just filled some trays up with some soil. This is the fluffy peat-free compost, perfectly well suited to this. And I will peg these runners down into those trays, sort out this tangled mess, peg them down in there, and then when they have rooted properly and they're growing away with a reasonable amount of root on them, I can then cut them free of the mother plants and just lift those trays out and go and transplant them either into a bed or then into pots that I will free up. I probably need to get a replacement late season strawberry because it's the later season one that I am discarding. And I think Gariguettes and Malling Centenary, they're both fairly early season, so it would be nice to spread it out a bit and maybe get a replacement for that. But it looks like I am otherwise getting plenty of runners. So this is just a case of untangling these very productive little fellows, and again using the little bits of bent wire, pegging them down so they can root in here. This one I'll just pinch that out and peg another down, and I can separate these later on. This is going to work quite nicely, I think. Oh, here comes a little bit more rain. The rain is just teasing us though. I had hoped that we'd get a proper downpour and it would last, but what we're getting is a brief spell and then nothing. So anyway, hopefully we'll get some more later on. I'll put that one there. And so on. So I'll work my way through these, peg them all down. Well, we had a great crop of strawberries this season, and hopefully with all these runners we'll get another great crop next year. But that is all for this video. Thanks ever so much for watching, and bye for now.